Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 3 of our scientific writing course. Whilst everyone's coming into the room, there are some Slido questions that you can answer for today. So if you go to could we display the slide, please? So when the slide comes up, we'll have the QR code there or the number that you can log in, and there's a couple of short questions to ask. There we go, there's the number there. Okay, so we're still waiting for some people to do the poll. One person responding. Oh, there we go. 100% has answered. So that's 1 of 1. So if you log into this Slido number, then this is how we can submit the questions as well as we go forward. So it's good to have that logged in on your phone. Okay, all right. Well, we might then, we'll come back to the poll at the end of the talk, but it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, who probably needs no introduction to most of the audience here. So Dr. Chandramurli, welcome to the stage, and he's going to talk to us about what the journals want. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, and thank you for coming so early. This presentation draws from the work of my good friends and close collaborators, Tor Berg, Charlie Irwin from the Journal of Adolescent Health, and I've drawn some material from PLOS. The PLOS has a whole set of writing tools. So where are we now? We are in session 3. Okay, you've had the session 1, which was led by Anne, focused on why publish. You know, what's the reason to publish? Session 2, which was led by Moazim. Yesterday was the anatomy of an article, and the feedback I got from Rita and from Moazim is also to talk today about the non-research articles. You know, I publish a lot of papers which do not relate to the standard research type. But I want to share with you things that I have learned over my journey and found useful. You know, one of the first things that happens when you write an article is you write an article and you're satisfied. It's been sitting on your head for months, you get it out, and you're really relieved it's gone. And one day later, you get a message. And you're hoping that, yeah, it's been registered, we are now in the process, but it says, we've done an initial screening and we don't think the article is suited for our journal. You could tear the years of the editor off. So, you know, I think that's the first thing you want to avoid. Yeah, you want to avoid getting this immediate rejection. So what does the Journal of Adolescence say are the 4 main reasons for rejecting papers? One is, of course, this is an Anglo-Saxon journal run by white men. So, you know, one of the things they'll say is poor English. And that is true. You know, we are in a white man's world still. The publishing is slowly changing. Power is slowly moving into other people's hands. But, you know, if we want to get published, we have to be as good or better than the Anglo-Saxon male. That's very important to do. So, you know, we have to get this right. And Anne herself, who's from Oxford and a writer and an editor, talked about the writing tools she uses. And I don't think you have to be ashamed about that. You know, asking someone for an opinion rewriting, checking it out is always useful. And I think my English is very good, but when you get someone, I have a wonderful assistant who's English, who I ask to check my language, and you become a little more humble about the things that your language could be improved. English language usage is a key issue. You'll have these slides, so I won't give you all the details, but English language usage is an important issue. Novelty. Many journals want to publish new things, something interesting. I get a lot of papers, for example, from Ethiopia. Ethiopia has, over the last 10 years, stimulated academics to write. There's a big pool of Ethiopian writers. You often get, we have done knowledge attitudes on condom use in high school students in this town of Ethiopia. And my standard response is, this is very interesting for a program design. This is not going to add to the global body of knowledge in this area. So what's novel about this? The third item is correlational data. This is associated with that. Those who use condoms are more likely to have these attributes. Again, that's very useful for program design. It doesn't tell you very much about what's happening unless you have some exceptional situation. If you're talking about people from Syria who've gone to Lebanon, and as a result of war, and there you can talk about some correlational data. Again, it comes back to novelty. Otherwise, you need, and then poorly contextualized results. I mean, I remember publishing a paper, in a set of 3 papers in Global Health Science and Practice on scaling up sexuality education. And we worked with the editor, and we had to convince him why it was important for these papers to be published. What he said to me was, there's nothing new about this work. What I told him is, there's nothing new about this work, but what is new is there's very few countries which do this work and do it well. So but we didn't put that out properly. So you have to contextualize why. In your eyes, it's completely clear. In the eyes of the editor, it needs to be clear. Otherwise, what's the context? There could be other reasons, and we have a wonderful band of editors in our panel who can tell you other reasons why. But remember, an editor is like a bank manager. They want to give a good loan. If a good paper is published, the editor also is happy. The sub-editor is also happy. So for us, we need to find out how to make them happy, how to make sure that they don't say, oh no. And it's so easy. When you're sitting with a pile of 100 papers, it's very easy to say, not another one that goes there. So, that's our challenge. Okay, so where do we go from here? Issues for rejection. Make your own list from your own papers which are rejected, from conversations like this. I think the most important thing to think about before we even write is, what are the 2 or 3 key messages? What I was taught was write the abstract of the paper even before you start writing the paper. And then you can rewrite the abstract, and by the time you finish, you may have abstract version 10. But you write the abstract, which means it forces you in half a page to write the key message. And once you write the abstract, you decide, who are you writing for? What is this message? What is this paper about? What are its key messages? Who will be most interested? So that is my second part of the presentation. Even before you start writing, start thinking about what do you want to say, why, and to whom, and what are they going to do in a basic, if you talk about behavior change or behavioral communication, they have this simple equation, who's communicating, to whom, for what reason, what do you want them to do as a result? And if those things are not clear, the paper is extremely muddled. I go through so many papers and I say, what are they trying to say? Why are they saying this? Why have they now put all this interesting data in it? I don't have the time to read it. That's the kind of frustration you don't want editors to have. If there is data in that paper, it should be tightly connected to your abstract. Okay, choosing the type of article to write. You can write, there are many different types of articles. And every journal will give you article types. And it's useful to think through what article type to use. And you can use creative ones. And sometimes you can define article type with the editor once you've got them hooked. And I'll tell you what to do to get them hooked. But you can already define, this is what I'm thinking about in terms of article type, and this is about what what the journal editor may tell you. See, there's a like you may all be very, very well aware, there's a huge US funding for trashing comprehensive sexuality education. So there's an Institute of Research and Evaluation, Salt Lake City, Evangelical Church, which kind of trashes the evidence. We're now about to publish a paper trashing their review. After a lot of discussions, JAH is going to publish a commentary, and SRH Matters is going to write the whole analysis. So you can milk a paper and get 3 versions of it if you're clever and you negotiate this with the editor. Okay, writing the article. The most important thing is, I won't go through this in any detail. It is there with you. Moazem talked to you about this. You have the structure of the scientific article, which is very standard, and I use a very simple formula. Introduction. What is this paper about? Why is this paper needed? What's the question that this paper seeks to answer? And I write this in 15 minutes once, and you develop it again and again and again. If you have formula, see, the journal article is not a Charles Dickens mystery novel. It needs to be predictable. And it needs to follow a predictable formula, but like Thorberg said, it needs to sing. So you're very restrained by the structure, but within that, it needs to work. So this is the structure, but what are the possible structures for a commentary? You can use, and that's the beautiful thing about writing commentaries and not needing to follow a scientific article structure. You can use a statement and support. You can use a question and answer. You can use a problem and solution. You can use any of these structures if it makes sense for your subject. So, what does your subject lend to? What's the kind of structure you can use? And once you step out of the, research question, methods, key findings, you can find there's so much freedom to write so many interesting things. I actually have to write the research article, but I find writing the commentary much more fun. And you can do both. Choosing the journal. And this is from this PLOS piece, which I really like. I encourage you to check out this article. I'll give you the links. What do you need from the journal? What are the journal's scope and requirements? And what are the strong candidates for submission? There are, and they give you a list of issues to consider to answer this question, almost an algorithmic approach to answering this question. And where is that link? I misplaced that link, but I'll give you maybe, yeah, it's here in the next one. So these are do's and don'ts of journal selection. Take your time to investigate options, choose your choice of journals, watch out for potential predatory journals, don't submit the same study to more than one journal at the same time. If you're doing what I said to you, writing a commentary there, explain to everyone so that there are no surprises. Submit to journals that do not publish your type of study. There's no point. You waste everyone's time in the process. And don't submit to the most prestigious journal. It's not one Lancet paper or one science article which is going to make your career. Most of my most successful papers have been in less prestigious journals. And nowadays, no one cares. You get a good paper in BMC Reproductive Health, it's as good as Lancet Global for all practical purposes. In my discussions with donors, no one cares which journal you publish. It's the message they're looking for now. Writing the article, again, a good story, well told. Thorberg calls it singing a song. It needs to sing. The article needs to sing. When you finish reading that article, you say, wow, what a nicely written piece. What a clear message. And it comes, as Anne said on day one, again and again and again. It needs to be written by you 3 or 4 times, peer-reviewed by someone in your group. Increasingly, what I do is I write an article and I publish it as a blog piece or something, and it comes back with feedback, and then I have a stronger journal article. So you use the blog piece as a part of your tightening up your arguments and the missing references and stuff in the process. Okay, getting noticed. I'm reaching the end of my presentation. The most important thing is the cover letter. What I used to do in the beginning, like many people do, is you write the paper, you get into this, very complex now electronic submission process, and then you have to, where's the cover letter? They won't allow you to proceed without a cover letter, okay? So you park it and you quickly dash a cover letter and you park. That's the wrong thing to do. Take 2 days to write the cover letter. It's almost as important as the article. Writing a cover letter which matches your abstract is really, the most important thing, the first thing the editor sees is your cover letter. And if I want a paper to be published, which is unusual, like this IRE, Institute of Research and Evaluation paper, I got people from the UNESCO, UNFPA, Comprehensive Sexuality Education Partnership Forum to write Torberg a letter of support as to why they believe this paper is important to be published. You use everything. You want to get your paper published. You can't bribe anyone and get it published. So you use every argument, every tool that you have to get that done. And that means getting your arguments strongly supported. Cover letter is important. The abstract is important. The title is important. The title helps you connect with the editors. And again, this is very right, The most important thing is, you imagine when you're searching for a subject, it's the abstract which makes sure that you read the paper. The abstract which makes sure that you cite the paper, that the paper is reviewed. So writing the paper is key, but spend time and effort in the title, in the abstract, in the cover letter, because that's how you get noticed. The last part of my presentation is revising your manuscript submission. So of course, you get back, you get 4 pages of feedback. It's good to see it and then leave it for 2 days, come back to it. It is difficult to accept all the criticism. But most of the times when you come back to it, you say, these are some things I don't agree with, but these are some really useful suggestions. At least half a dozen times, I've invited reviewers to be part of my paper because they've added so much to my paper that, it's only fair that, you remember Anne had the criteria for inclusion. They met some of the criteria, sometimes more than some of my other co-authors. So, I included them to be part of the author paper. So approaching the revisions, distancing, be prompt, clear, constructive revision and response. Thank you very much. I hear what you say, but I disagree for the following reason. You can disagree for a good third of the comments. Choose carefully what to disagree with, because you don't want to disagree with too much. But you need to see which ones you want to disagree with, and then thank them and compliment them for the very thoughtful comments on other issues which you agree with and which you can take on board. And then a revision letter, a point-by-point revision letter. And then a resubmission letter, which needs to be, again, as good as your original submission. A good letter communicates the message that in today's world, if somebody takes the trouble to read your paper and give you feedback, you need to thank them, give them a kiss. Because most of the time, people don't read. They say, oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting is actually disrespectful. They haven't really looked at your paper. When they look at your paper and give you feedback, even critical feedback, they've done justice to your paper. They've actually given you respect because, and particularly when you have a paper which is not there in the right direction, to get good editorial comments is so precious. So that's what I have to say. I published 125 papers. I publish 10 papers every year. Some of my papers fly through. It almost doesn't touch the ground. Some of the papers are rejected 3 times. I never give up on a paper. I never have shelved a paper. I get it published, but it means doggedly working on this. And people ask me, why do you do it? Where do you find the time to do it? When I'm walking my dog in the morning, I find that I'm most clear with my ideas. Writing about it has opened so many doors because it opens doors for various sessions, it opens doors for money. I can tell donors, thank you for this offer of interest in giving us money. I don't need it now. Someone else needs this money. That's the power writing gives you. And again, WHO, I've been in WHO now 30 years. Next year I retire. It's no longer a white man's world. Tedros, our Director General, is Ethiopian. But still, When I joined, it was 5 white men controlling 5 journals in USA and the UK. Things have changed. Things have changed. But still, that's the standard. I've always used that as the standard to be better than them. All the best, and I'm sure y'all can as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandraji. Thank you for such a wonderful and interesting presentation. Have- No, we have 4 chairs here. I have the chairs.
Please come.
So I think this was really great. I think everybody would agree to it. The focus for the last 3 years, one common thread is running: clarity, clarity, clarity. So I think when we start writing a paper, we need to be very clear. And what also came out very clear from, and what Chandraji emphasized was a cover letter. I think many of us do not write a cover letter. So I think that's also very important. Clarity and context, again, very important. So now we'll have a little panel discussion. And this panel discussion will be for around 15 to 20 minutes. And following the panel discussions, we'll open the floor for Q&A. So anyone who has a question can send a question either using the slider, or you could also use the mic and just come and do the questions. Yeah. Let's put the slider on.
While you do that, can they introduce themselves?
Yes, I'm going to do that. So we have a very good panel today, a very esteemed panel. We have 4 editors, of which, of course, one you already know, Dr. Chandramouli from WHO. We have Hannah Wilson from Gates Open Research, and I will ask you to introduce in a minute. And we have Ruwada Salem from Global Health Science and Practice, again a very esteemed journal. And then we have Angel Foster, an editor for Contraception. So in the last few days, 2 days, again, there were some questions for editors. The editors are here today. Feel free to bring up your questions again. So what I would like is, I will propose a question to the panelists. Please feel free to inform the group about what you do, introduce yourself, and then if you could answer the question. So of course, the first question goes to Dr. Chandramouli from WHO. Dr. Chandraji, you are both a publisher as well as you've been an editor. You started your journey by publishing, and finally you became an editor. Please advise our team some of the essential ingredients you need to keep in mind while writing a paper, and then you need to what you keep in mind when you edit a paper. And please do this more in the form of, not as a scientific paper, but what you need to do when you are developing a paper like a commentary or based on of our policy makers or program managers. So this is a question coming from the globe, and I'm just putting to you. Over to you, Dr. Chandra.
Thank you. I actually addressed this in my presentation, but I'll repeat it again. You know, it's, you want to tell a story. So when you're writing it, you want to tell a story. And you want it to connect with the interest of the journal you're publishing. Esther Kismodi has just walked in, the editor of SRH Matters, Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters journal. So I know they're very interested in standing up to resistance to sexual and reproductive health. So we pitched our analysis of the criticism of the IRE report, the Institute of Research and Evaluation report, to them. And she was so excited, jumping up and down, and said, let's write this, publish this paper, and let's have a round table of people whom can come together and explain their perspectives of how it could be, why such papers are damaging to the field. So it's about connecting. That's my story. It doesn't matter if it is not a research study, as long as you can connect what your message is and how does that connect to the objectives of the journal. In terms of editing, the main question for me is, when I'm reviewing a paper, is what is the key message? And as Tor Berg said in one of the slides, does it go all the way from the title all the way to the end of the paper? Is it coherent? Is there a clear message? Is it convincing? Is each step in the process build on the other one? And is it logical? Are they making statements which are based on findings, or are they coming out from the blue? You know, you're looking for a well-written piece with a clear and well-argued message.
Thank you, Chandraji. Thank you so much. So the next question is to Hannah. Hannah, you've been working at Gates Open Research. You are an editor there. We would like you to talk to our colleagues today about open access research. And why do we need, what is this open access policy and how does it help us more in publishing? Whoa. And please introduce yourself.
Sure. So by way of introduction, I'm Hannah Wilson, and my role is actually within a publishing company. So rather than being sort of an academic editor, I work within publishing companies, and I've been doing that on and off for about the last 10 years. And the organisation I work for, F1000, are quite an innovative open publisher, and one of the things we do is work with funding agencies and foundations and organisations who want to support their grantees and make sure that the research they're funding is being shared as easily as possible. So that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow, is Gates Open Research, which is the publishing platform supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is predominantly set up to support their grantees in publishing their research outputs, but that also has opportunities for presenters at this conference as part of the foundation sponsorship of the event. But to talk specifically about the sort of open access policies, and I know we've touched on open access over the last few days, I think this is really a space now where there's a lot of innovation, and the models of journal publishing that we've perhaps become quite used to and that we've been seeing over the last 50 to 100 years are starting to change. Open access is becoming the norm, and it's becoming the expectation. A large number of particularly international funders it started with, but it's now growing globally, are mandating, if you are taking our grant money, you have to publish your outputs from this grant open access. And if they're mandating that, then they should also be providing funding to allow you to do that. Having said that, open access shouldn't always cost money. There are routes to open access publishing that don't involve article processing charges. Obviously, I'll talk about Gates Open Research as one of those tomorrow, but actually there are lots of different opportunities available. I recommend the Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ site, if you're interested in learning more about the different models of open access and the ways in which you can reach open access based on your funding situation. I think the argument for open access in terms of being able to read a paper that's not behind a paywall, you don't need a subscription to read it, that argument has been had and is well understood, right? We all know that it's really frustrating if you read an abstract, you really want to read the paper because it's really related to the work you're doing, but you can't read it without paying $30, $50, $100. It's frustrating. We know that open access papers get read more, they get cited more, and they get built on more. So when there are routes to do it, it makes complete sense. At Gates Open Research and working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we try and take the concept of open publishing a bit further than just open access. So the foundation also has a policy on data sharing, and this is something that increasingly as well funders are starting to put in place, saying not only do the research articles and other papers that you publish from our grant need to be made open access, but actually any data that you generate from those grants need to be shared openly as well. I think open data is something that can be quite off-putting to people if they're not familiar with it. Perhaps the institution where they work doesn't have much in the way of support for data sharing, but it really doesn't have to be a difficult thing. And the sort of motto that we live by at Gates Open Research is as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. You know, there are lots of situations where it's not possible to share all of your data, but it might be possible to share some anonymized or summary data. There are lots of situations where perhaps you think you don't have data. Perhaps you've been doing qualitative research or interviews and you think, well, that's not data. actually there are lots of ways in which transcripts can be shared via repository in anonymized forms, and lots of ways in which other forms of more non-traditional data can be shared. And then just the final thing to quickly touch on, I think something that came to me during the great presentation that we had this morning was actually looking at the journal that you want to submit to, look at their ethos before you submit, and think about the paper that you're looking to publish. Some journals really do focus on papers that are exciting and novel, and that's really important. Other journals don't really focus on that. There's a bit of a movement towards what we often refer to in the publishing industry as sound science journals. Gates Open Research is an example of that, but there are lots of them out there. And these are journals that say, actually, if your research is conducted well, we don't mind how novel it is. We don't mind if it's been conducted in one really specific population and perhaps hasn't got that much value outside of that specific region, because we do think that there's still value in being able to publish and reducing the research waste, which is specifically why the foundation funds this project. So I think look and understand the ethos of the journal you're looking to submit to.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much, and thank you for explaining about open access and your point about publishing even smaller studies coming from smaller areas, because very often we hear this, that this paper was not published because this only represents one country or one local area. But that context is very important, and as also mentioned by Chandraji and now reconfirmed by you, that it's very important to publish even smaller stories. Doesn't have to be novel all the time. Good science. So our third panelist today is Ruwaida Salam, who is who leads the Global Health Science and Practice Journal. And my question to you, Ruwaida, is, of course, you have to introduce yourself to our colleagues. And then if you could tell us more about the peer review method that you use and the importance of peer review methods. How do you identify the reviewers? And sometimes we hear that a lot of time goes away by the time a paper is submitted and it comes to publish. So what are some of the challenges, and why does it take so much time? Everybody's keep thinking, why does it take so much time? And sometimes when the paper is published, it may be as long as 18 months. So please explain.
Thank you. So my name is Ruwaida Salam. I'm not the manager of the journal. I'm here representing the Global Health Science and Practice Journal. I'm a senior program officer with the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. And so we're based in Baltimore, Maryland in the US, and we publish the journal. It's a USAID funded journal, and so we're very unique in a lot of ways. One way in which we're unique is that we focus on programs and program implementation, and our niche is really sharing the how of programs. So we know a lot about what works and the different types of interventions that work in family planning. But everybody keeps saying, program managers, technical advisors, they want more details on the how. We know this intervention works, but how did you implement it in your region, in your area? So that's why the journal was founded almost 10 years ago. We're coming up to our 10-year anniversary. This was the brainchild of Jim Shelton from USAID. And so the idea was we want to get those implementation details out of the gray literature, and sometimes they're not even documented at all. And we want to bring them into more of the robust scientific literature. And so that's what our mission is. And we cover all global health areas. Family planning is definitely one of our prominent topics that we focus on, as well as MCH and other areas. But to answer your specific question, for peer review, one more thing. So the other way that we're different is that we don't charge any fees at all to readers, and we don't charge fees to authors to submit their articles. So we're completely open access. So a lot of times some journals will provide open access options, which is great, but usually the author has to pay a fee to to make it open access, but they do sometimes provide options for, like, if you're from a low and middle income country. But our journal, across the board, we don't charge any fees to authors or to readers. But we wanted to be taken seriously too. We knew that this was going, 10 years ago, this was a hard space to come into with that kind of model. So we wanted to be taken seriously, so we tried to apply a lot of traditional journal methodologies, and one of them being our peer review model. So we follow a double-blind peer review. I know a lot of newer journals have transparent open review, and that's something that, you know, we could consider in the future, but for now what we follow is a double-blind peer review, which means that the reviewers don't know the identity of the authors, and the authors don't know the identity of the peer reviewers. And we followed this model because we thought it was important to be completely open in the peer review process. We didn't want the peer reviewers to be biased. Maybe they know the author and they're more likely to publish and to say, yes, let's publish this article because I know this person, and the opposite way, in the opposite direction, that they might be biased against the authors if they know the identity of the authors. And we also wanted the peer reviewers to feel open in how they provide their responses. So that's how we handle our peer review. It does take a while. It does take some time. And the reason behind this is that these peer reviewers are doing this completely free, on their own time. They're very busy professionals. We all are busy professionals. We know how our days go. And we're asking them to take time, extra time out of their day to do this. And like Chandra was saying, you don't want a peer reviewer who just says, oh yeah, this looks great, or oh no, reject this paper. We want critical feedback, and so it takes time to provide that critical feedback. So our timeline for peer review, it's longer than we want, but it's not as bad as some other journals. I'm trying to look at my notes to see what our general timeline is, but I want to say that it takes about, so from the time that an author submits to the time that it takes to get the peer review comments, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks, which is about, 2 months. It could be worse, but we're trying to continuously try to get that lower. And the time from submission to final publication, about 6 to 9 months. So.
Thank you so much, Vedas. Thank you for presenting so clearly about the peer review mechanism, which is really important, which many of us wanted to understand. So our next panelist is Angel Foster, and she heads the Contraception, a very reputed journal in our field. Angel, please introduce yourself, and then let us know, especially what kind of papers you accept in this journal, and something the colleagues asked me about journal impact factor. So why is this journal impact factor really important, and what should we consider when looking into which journals to publish?
Great. Well, first, thanks so much for inviting me to be here. My name is Angel Foster. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or anything respectful. I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa, and I just want to acknowledge that the University of Ottawa stands on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I am both a deputy editor at Contraception and the editor-in-chief of Perspectives on Sexual and Reproductive Health, so I'm going to take a minute to talk about both of these journals. Contraception is a very old established journal. It was established in 1970, so it's over 50 years old. It is the official journal of the Society of Family Planning, and Contraception publishes articles related to contraception and abortion, sometimes a little bit of other sexual and reproductive health issues, but it's very contraception and abortion focused. It is a global journal, so it will publish on studies from anywhere in the world, but its primary readership is mostly out of the United States and in the global north. So it's important to keep that in mind in terms of framing article submission. Contraception is a unique journal in our field in that it publishes basic science and laboratory research, as well as clinical studies, social science research, health policy, and public health work. So it actually publishes a full range, and so we see a lot of articles in Contraception that are about basic science. And so how it is that we're developing new contraceptive technologies, for example. Contraception is a go-to journal in that space. Contraception uses a single blind peer review process, so the reviewers do know who the authors are that are submitting. It takes about 3 months from the time of initial submission if the article goes out for peer review to get peer-reviewed feedback, and typically articles are then published within 6 to 9 months, a pretty standard timeline, I think, within the field. Contraception publishes short articles. So here I think it's important, one of the things to look at when you're thinking about different journals is what the manuscript length requirements are. Contraception publishes original research articles that are about 2,500 words. It's very short. Brief research articles are 1,000 words. It's very short. We do have some allowance for qualitative or multi-methods or mixed methods research, but contraception's primary audience are clinicians and researchers who want short pieces that they can get through quickly. And so if you have a complex study that needs thousands of words to frame and to present your results, contraception is not the journal to submit to, just to sort of start with that. Perspectives on Sexual and Reproductive Health. Many of you may have been familiar with this. This was a journal that has been published out of the Guttmacher Institute for decades. It has now transitioned to the University of Ottawa. It also is a journal that has an over 50-year history, so a long established journal. Perspectives on Sexual and Reproductive Health publishes on a range of sexual and reproductive health topics, so not just contraception and abortion, although those are two of the dominant areas that the journal publishes on. Perspectives publishes on global work, but it has a primary focus on global North countries, comparative studies, and truly global or international work. There is a companion journal called International Perspectives on Sexual and Reproductive Health that focuses more on global South countries and settings. Perspectives publishes much longer articles, so more in the 6,000 word range. As a result, the peer review process actually takes a lot longer. And so it takes more like 6 to 9 months to get a first decision, and articles are published quarterly, usually within a year. Both of these journals are subscription journals that have open access options, but authors have to pay for their articles to be open access, so there are article processing charges. There are waivers for both journals for people, for primary authors that can either be first or corresponding authors that are from LMICs. I will say that these policies are set by the publishing houses, and it's Elsevier that publishes contraception, and it's Wiley that publishes perspectives on sexual and reproductive health. So those policies tend to be standard across the journals that are published with these houses. I was asked to speak a little bit about impact factor, and just to say that impact factor has historically been used as a metric for evaluating the relative prestige or ranking of journals in a particular field. It's based on citations and citability. Impact factors are typically calculated by looking at the number of articles that have been published over a previous 2-year period that have the potential to be cited, and then how many citations came out of them. I will say that I think we are in a moment where impact factor matters so much less than it historically has. I think it is so much more important to look at whether the journal is a good fit for your project, whether the journal's requirements meet what it is that you want to get out of publishing your study, whether the audience of the journal is someone that is an audience that you want to engage with. Unfortunately, within academia, sometimes tenure and review committees or promotion committees will look at impact factor. So there is this sort of reality out there that sometimes impact factor can be used in that way. But I would say from a pure sort of scientific and dissemination perspective, we really need to move away from impact factor. There's a lot of ways that impact factor is manipulated.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Thank you, great. We are almost at the top of the hour. We have got a lot of questions which we will not be able to respond immediately, but we will send you responses later. But I have a colleague here who would really like to take the mic. So you have 2 minutes, Esther. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm Esther Chief Executive of Sexual and... Sorry, not good?
It's okay.
I'm Chief Executive of Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters. Maybe you know the journal before, RHM, Reproductive Health Matters. We changed the name to Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters. to comprehensively address that we stand up for sexual and reproductive health and rights. Traditionally, Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters was really the only journal 30 years ago that specifically published on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now we are recognizing that there are so many amazing journals in the world, so we shifted our focus and we care about and really interested in knowledge to action. We are also very much interested in rights, gender equality analysis, and we are interested in stretching the boundaries of evidence. So we recognize that there is a lot of actors in the field who might have not been trained on writing, but has amazing knowledge, including community-based group, including policymakers, including service directors. So we also opened up the type of articles that we are publishing. So we publish research articles, we publish review articles. We also enhance and encourage multidisciplinarity. So when you are a researcher, why don't you pair up with a human rights person or an advocacy group and have a more comprehensive view of what you are planning to publish? We are aiming for reaching out to Global South. So we have 7 language editions, and we also have regional hubs. We started with South Asia Regional Hub and SRHM South Asia Journal and Francophone Africa, where you can submit your article in French, and then it's translated to English. So we really encourage that to think out of the box, and we are really trying to make sure that knowledge is represented in so many different ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much for your perspectives, and everyone, thanks so much. I think there's one more question from you. You wanted to ask something to the editors? Yes? Did you? Yeah. Yeah. I think we'll take that as the last question, and our editors can.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us. This was really exciting, great info, and I'm hoping some will stick around after, since there were some really good questions put in Slido too. The question I asked on Monday, and that I think is maybe worth revisiting, is the opportunities in which we can make the scientific writing process more accessible and less exclusionary. I know we've spoken a bit today about open access. I'm also thinking a bit about peer review and how difficult that is. I understand when you think about asking people to do unpaid work to review this. Of course, that ends up being naturally falling heavily on like a lot of scientists, and particularly social scientists, are women. The burden in which has been undue on them, and the ways in which they've fallen off the ability to publish in COVID, and some of the really scary studies that are coming out about scientific advancement. I understand paying people to review science steps into some muddy water, but we're already kind of in muddy water asking people to do unpaid review work, and how that's passing, and particularly in getting reviews and hearing voices that can understand the contexts in which people are publishing. I'm also thinking about how much it's built around institutions, for institutions that purchase access to journals that allow you to do a comprehensive literature review that sets you up for better publishing success, and the access to that. The institutions that often front the costs of publishing charges if you are not falling within a waiver. So I'm curious to hear from you all internally what other discussions are coming up, and what other opportunities might we see in the next year as we think about broadening and lessening the barriers to publishing outside of Anglo-Saxon institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anna, could you also introduce yourself for a minute?
Yes,
Could you just
hi.
introduce yourself, and then our panelists will try to respond to your queries.
Yeah, I'm
Lots of
Allison
questions.
Hoover. I'm from Emory University. I'm from one of those Anglo-Saxon institutions. So really curious to hear how we can be doing better and thinking beyond.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you
Yes,
for your question.
please.
I'll give you 2 concrete examples. A Journal of Adolescent Health published a supplement on child marriage last year, and now Global Health Science and Practice is in the process of submitting a set of papers from the Challenge Initiative. And in both these cases, what we said was, we would be glad to take on the responsibility for reviewing the papers. So as WHO, I don't get paid. I get paid by WHO, so I don't get paid. But we are engaged with funding from the funder, young people to be part of the, one middle-level researcher from the South and a young person from the South to be part of the editorial team, but being paid for it, and with a line in the sand between the funders and us. So for instance, when Gates funded this supplement, we refused to meet any of the Gates people who were involved in that till the paper was published. So that means our principle is young people, if they are involved, should be paid, and we can get funders to pay for this process so that we are involved with that, but we are completely separate from the funders so that we are not influenced, even politely in gentle webinars where a little nudge can be made in this process. I think there are ways of doing that. Happy to talk more about that with you.
So at Gates Open Research, particularly to answer your point around peer review, we take a very different approach to peer review. So our peer review is completely open and it's also transparent. So the identities of authors and reviewers are known to each other. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But our peer review reports are published. So they get a DOI and they can be cited. So we think that's a small step. It's not solving the issue. But we think that reviewers deserve credit for the work that they've done. And that's something that they can then add to their CV, and it is part of their body of work. It's something that they can cite, they can add it to their ORCID profile, or whatever they use to track their research outputs, which I personally think is important. On the matter of access to literature and journal subscriptions, obviously a real barrier to many. There are access programs that exist. Researchers who are based at institutions in lower middle income countries as classified by the WHO, right, should be able to gain access via the Research for Life program. There should be people at those institutions who know that that access is available to them if they're eligible. I know it doesn't solve the issue entirely, but there are programs available.
Thank you so much. Yerubai.
I think we're almost out of time, so I'll try to make this really quick. I'll address the issue from the author perspective. We do recognize, we highly encourage authors from low and middle income countries to submit, and we actually have a new policy in our journal. If a paper is written about a country, somebody from that country has to be an author on that paper, and we are rejecting papers or, you know, having conversations with authors to ask them to invite an author from that country to be on the paper. So we recognize that some of the there could be language barriers, there could be, we focus on program implementers as well, so this could be their first time publishing papers, they might not be familiar with how to write a paper. So we do work with authors. We have a decision point called intervention. So paper gets submitted, we see like a diamond in the rough, we call it. There's something important there, but it needs more polishing. So we give feedback to the author before we even send it out to peer review to get it into better shape. And then when it gets submitted to peer review, it has a better chance. It's not 100% guaranteed. Sometimes those papers still, unfortunately, do get rejected. But we do try to work with authors as much as possible. And we do a lot of heavy editing, copy editing on the back end as well for papers that do get accepted. So we try as much as possible not for language or inexperience to be a barrier for them to publish.
Thank you so much. We want to
I'll just add one thing that we're trying to do to compensate peer reviewers, and that is for perspectives on sexual and reproductive health, for reviewers who review multiple articles over the course of the year, we're able to give them a waiver for open access fees for an article that they submit. It's the best that we can do when we don't have an ability, because of the journal's budget, to be able to monetarily reward somebody or acknowledge somebody's contributions, but giving someone the ability to publish an open access article has some currency to it.
Thank you so much.
So
I
just
think-
a message as you leave, you know, there should be an article that you're writing all the time. You have to set aside, you know, half an hour every day to write something and get 3 papers out. Doesn't matter if it's rejected the first time. All the best.
Thank you. Let's applaud, give them a